welcome to you all to the Argo Navis Follow the Stars Conference. Croeso I gynhadledd Argo Navis Dilynwch y Sêr, prosiect sydd yn cael ei rhedeg gan Menter, prosiect trawswladol sydd yn derbyn cyllid gan rhaglen cymunedau gwledig, rhaglen datblygu gwledig Llywodraeth Cymru yma yng Nghymru. You are now part of and witnessing a very special event we have here, which is the Argo Navis Follow the Stars Conference. It's a Menter, a transnational project which has received funding from the Welsh Government's Rural Communities Rural Development Programme 2014 to 2020. We've just had an amazing session with Katie King. I hope you managed to join us on that. But I think we're going to have just an amazing session here as well with Dani Robertson from Snowdonia National Park. Dani, I've heard your previous sessions about wildlife bywyd gwyllt. If I'm seeing the same thing again today, it will not matter one little bit, because I'm fascinated by the night sky. I'm fascinated by what happens up in the night sky, but I'm just as fascinated by what happens on Earth at night, and how important it is that we are aware of the wildlife bywyd gwyllt y nos here on Earth, and certainly the wildlife and nature here in Wales, in Snowdonia, where you're up there, Dani, but across Wales and across the UK. The impact nighttime has on nature. So really, diolch yn fawr iawn, Dani, am ymuno gyda ni heddi. Dwi'n gyffroes iawn i glywed beth sydd ati weid. Unwaith eto, mae'n bleser cael dy gwmni di, a gobeithio fydd beth sydd gen ti weid yn gyfle I bobl i ddeall mwy am yr hyn sy'n digwydd unwaith mae wedi tywyllu yma yng Nghymru. A chance to discover more about what happens at night time to the wildlife here in Wales once that sun has set. Os oes cwestiynau gyda chi, rhowch cwestiynau yn y chat. If you have questions, please put your questions in the chat, and Dani will answer. We'll have 10 minutes towards the end of her session to answer some questions. Dani, drosodd I ti.
Diolch yn fawr, David, and as ever, such a good introduction. I'm not sure I can live up to it, but I'll do my best. So, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Dani, and I am the Dark Skies Officer for Project North, the Dark Skies North Wales Partnership. When I say Dark Skies, this is what people immediately leap to thinking that I do. I do not work for Darth Vader. I've got nothing to do with the Death Star. But this is what I do. So Project North is a Dark Skies partnership between the 4 protected landscapes in North Wales. Parc Cenedlaethol Eryri, Snowdonia National Park, they are my main employer, and they have been a dark sky reserve since 2015, something we are super proud of. It took a lot of work. So it's one of the best places you can come to in the UK to come and see dark skies. I also work with the areas of outstanding natural beauty as well. So we've got Brynja Clwyd a Dyffryn Dyfrdwy, Llyn Peninsula, Penllyn, and Ynys Môn, Anglesey. So I'm working with those 3 areas to protect their dark skies and minimise light pollution, and to hopefully get dark sky protected status in the future. So this is what a dark sky reserve is. This is the definition by the International Dark Sky Association. They are the ones who oversee the overall programme. They're based in Arizona. And if you have a dark sky area that you want to get protected, that's who you apply to. So this basically sums up my job. So it's a nocturnal environment or a nightscape, and it's specifically protected for its scientific, natural, educational, cultural heritage, and or public enjoyment. So my job, I get to take lots of people out stargazing, doing lots of stuff around wildlife, seeing the stars and the cultural heritage in Wales. But obviously today we're going to focus on nature. So it sounds a bit silly. I'll just talk a bit more about what a dark sky is, because surely everyone has dark sky. The sun goes down, it goes dark. But not all dark skies are equal. So a dark sky area is somewhere where stars are visible to the naked eye with very little light pollution, and it's usually in a protected designation like a national park, an area of outstanding natural beauty, or if you look at somewhere like Elan Valley, that's a private landowner, so they were able to apply for status there. And why are dark skies important? There's a whole host of reasons that I'm sure you're hearing loads about through all the different speakers today. But the one we're going to focus on today, obviously, is wildlife. So only 2% of Britain's population receives a truly dark sky. So that is somewhere where you can go out and you can see more than 10 stars in the night sky. That seems like a massive amount of people who don't get natural darkness. But if you look at these maps for light pollution, you can see that sadly it is very true. So this is most of Western Europe and obviously the United Kingdom. The red and white patches, that's where light pollution is at its worst. Fade into the dark greys and blacks where the skies are best. And you can even see that we've not only land is impacted, we're impacting sea. You can see shipping channels, and there's some little weird blobs up in the North Sea, and they're actually oil rigs. So the way these maps are put together, they're images taken by satellites flying over the Earth at night. And it's amazing to me to think that oil rigs are showing up to something that is flying around us in space. But that's the reality of where we are. But if we zoom into Wales, you can see in Wales we are pretty much defined by how dark we are, which is wonderful. It's excellent. You can see all of the dark sky areas, pretty much all the places that are good to go stargazing. So obviously the areas I cover, Snowdonia and the 3 AUMBs, but you can also see the Cambrians where David is, Gower, Pembrokeshire, and the Brecon Beacons as well, who were the first dark sky reserve in Wales. This is what light pollution looks like to someone on the ground. So this is sky glow, but it's also known as Alan. So sorry, Alans out there, your name has been stolen for artificial light at night, not this Alan. So it's a good way to remember it. But dark skies doesn't mean no light. So it's really important in my work that I make people appreciate that we're not trying to turn lights off at all. If you can turn the light off, that is the best solution, don't get me wrong, but we're not trying to take light away from anyone. This is a photo from Tucson in Arizona, which is the home of the International Dark Sky Association. And as you can imagine, their lighting is pretty good for dark skies. So they've got all their lights downward facing, so no light is escaping up into the atmosphere and not making that horrible sky glow or Alan. So you can see that you can have the best of both worlds. So if we go back to this map of Wales, I want you to try and think of this now from wildlife's perspective. So we share our world with wildlife, and our wildlife needs natural darkness. So when we look at light pollution and you think in terms of habitat, look how much habitat we are impacting through light pollution. And this isn't anything anyone has done on purpose to harm wildlife, but it is something we now need to be aware of. More than 60% of our biodiversity depends on dark skies. We know that it's more than 60%, we just haven't got around to testing all of the wildlife, so know that it has an effect. But we know and understand a lot more now than we did 30 years ago, and we are actually having devastating impacts on our wildlife by lighting up habitat. It has a huge negative impact on lots of different species, but one of the main ones that we can draw examples to things like migratory birds and insects, bats, all of these things I'm going to talk about over the next few slides. But we talk about being in a climate emergency. So when we looked at those light pollution maps, light pollution is a complete waste of energy. It's light that's going up into the atmosphere. And it actually costs the UK government £1 billion every year just in wasted light that's not doing its job, just going up into the sky where we don't want it. And it actually accounts for 15% of the world's electricity bill. So it's a huge source of carbon. But not only are we facing a climate crisis, we are also facing a biodiversity crisis. And if we don't sort out the biodiversity crisis, life is going to be impossible for us on Earth. So it is so important that we take these messages on light pollution today and apply them at our own homes, our own places of work, And it doesn't have to be just rural places, urban places. If you're watching us today from a city or a town, please take these messages, and you can have such a good impact if you live somewhere urban. So one of the first species that everyone knows, I think, is affected by light is the bat. Developers hate bats, but they're actually incredibly important to the UK and the EU, and they're actually one of our keystone species. So they are one of the indicators of biodiversity health, because they're one of the first things that show an effect, like their numbers go down or they start to become sick when something is imbalanced in the ecosystem. So we keep a really close eye on our bats, on their numbers, how they're doing, how healthy the populations are, because that lets us see a much wider picture in different species to see how healthy the ecosystems are. So in the UK, we're home to 18 bat species, which is quite a lot. We've got things like common and soprano pipistrelles, noctules, brown long-eared bats, lesser and greater horseshoes, which are increasingly rare, sadly to say. But each of these species and their breeding and resting places are protected by law. So that shows you how important they are to our knowledge about the natural world. You cannot go rooting around for bat roosts. You need to have a licensed handler with you. So please don't take any of this information away and start going to look for bat roosts, because you might get into trouble. So to observe bats, they're a really great thing to see at dusk and at dawn. I absolutely love bats. They like to make their homes in woodlands and wetlands, farms, and even urban areas. They can be found in homes. I have some that live in my roof. I have some soprano pipistrelles. I do have names for them, but I won't share them with you. The best places to see them in North Wales, or some of the most accessible places to see them, are Nant y Pandy, the dingle in Llangefni, and Gwaith Powder in Penrhyn Deudraeth, just on the edge of the national park. So Nant y Pandy in Llangefni is actually home to 8 different species of bat. And that includes pipistrelles and the noctule bats, which are a really high-flying species, and also the lesser and greater horseshoe bats, which are very rare species. So it's a really good place to go. The best time to see bats is when they're really active, so when they're fattening themselves up for hibernation. So you will still see them in the dusks now as the sun starts to set. We are getting to the end of when we will start to see our bats, because they're all going back home to hibernate for winter. So it's a good time to see them fattening themselves up, trying to get as many insects as they can. If you do want to go and see bats, they fly above us all the time. You probably don't even realise. But I really recommend joining the Gwynedd Bat Group. They do some really good walks. They've done ones in Gwaith Powder and they've done ones in Nant y Pandy in Llangefni, which are really excellent. That's somebody who's a licensed bat handler normally, and they've got so much knowledge. They can tell you all about the different bats that are there. And the North Wales Wildlife Trust as well, they do ones in Gwaith Powder, and they actually own Gwaith Powder, so they do a lot of work with bats there, and I'm doing some work with them to reduce light pollution on Gwaith Powder, because light pollution has massive consequences for our bats. Most species are incredibly light sensitive. They won't fly through light, or they won't emerge when it's too light. So bats, when they emerge from roosts, they do a thing called light sampling. So they stick their heads out, have a see how much light is around, and if it's not quite dark enough, they'll retreat. But if you stick a floodlight on your house and that's covering a roost entrance, you can sadly entomb bats, which is a really awful thing to happen to them, for them to be trapped inside because they can't get out. A lot of them avoid light. This could be for lots of different evolutionary reasons, but one of the main reasons is so they don't get predated by other things in the night sky. Bats are wonderful. They get a really bad rep, but they actually need to eat each pipistrelle. So a pipistrelle is tiny. They're probably, I think they weigh the same as a penny or something like that. They need to eat 3,000 insects a night. So they're really good at pest control. So if you want to enjoy your garden in the summer, get some bats on the case and you won't get bitten by mosquitoes and things. But again, a lot of bats have evolved to use light. And in urban areas, bats have actually been seen using street lights where insects have been collecting to basically have like a banquet, but that leaves them really open to predation. And there's been records of things like peregrine falcons and other birds of prey actually hunting bats around streetlights. So where there's one strength that comes from a light they can adapt to, they will always lose out somewhere along the line. So how can you help bats? So wildlife gardening is really important. Have lots of insect-friendly plants. So there'll be lots of insects in your garden for them to eat. You can build a bat box. And the most important thing is to be considerate with light usage. So communities are considering things like these bat corridors. So these are low-level lights at a low Kelvin, which means a warm light, so that the bats aren't impacted by the lights. The next species I'm going to talk to you about is the European nightjar. These are a really cool bird. They're also known as a night hawk because they come out at dusk and they look a bit like they're hunting. Well, they are hunting, but they look a bit like hawks as they're flying through the woodlands. They are a migratory species. So they come from sub-Saharan Africa, and it's been proven that they synchronize their migration with phases of the moon. And they were one of the first animals that we learned could do this and had associate themselves with the lunar cycle. So nightjars are a really interesting species because throughout history, humans have been scared of the dark, and we've been scared of things that go bump in the night and make funny noises. And unfortunately for nightjars, they do make a really funny noise. So it's very unlikely you'll see a nightjar, but you will hear one if you go to somewhere like Moor or Heathland. They really like clearings and conifer plantations. But they have a really distinctive churring call, and that's the males calling to the females. Historically, people were scared of them because they sounded like witches cackling in bushes, so they thought that they were coming to get their children, and they would make all sorts of crazy stories. So much so that the Latin name for a nightjar is caprimulgus, which roughly translates to goat sucker. So in medieval Britain, they thought that the nightjars were coming to steal the milk from their goats and other livestock. So they were heavily prosecuted, along with hedgehogs and other animals. Obviously, we know that's not true now. And if you do get to hear one of these, or better still see one, they're wonderful birds to see. One of the best places in North Wales is Coedlan Begla in Denbighshire. And in June and July, they've got a really short period where they're in the UK. And the warm, still evenings are the best when there's lots of insects, hardly any wind around, and you get to hear that call. The next animals to talk about are amphibians. So amphibians, it's been a lot of research done lately by Plant Life and Frog Life, two charities in the UK. But there was a study by the University of Ohio that proved that light pollution is so damaging that toads subjected to constant light had their growth stunted by 15%, and it stopped frogs laying their eggs altogether. So they're having catastrophic implications for these species, and we just haven't understood what we were doing with light at all. One of the reasons frogs and toads are in decline is because we lose so many to our roads, and one of the leading theories on that is because of the street lights around the roads. They get attracted there by the lights for whatever reason. It could be that the insects again are drawing in lights. It could be that they think it's moonlight. We don't exactly understand why yet, but then they seem to get trapped in these light corridors, and unfortunately they get run over. So if you want to help frogs, you can join a toad patrol. So these go on in the very early or late spring, depending which way you want to look at it, late winter, early spring. And they've got them all over the place. So Pentir, Newbrook, Llympark Glas, Llanrug, Morfa Nefyn, Bodfari, there's loads of them. So if you go on the Toad Patrol website, you can sign yourself up. And basically these are volunteers who don high-vis jackets. They go out in late spring or mild evenings when it's likely that they will be migrating. So they tend to migrate February, but it can be as early as January, and they're migrating to the places that they were spawned so that they can lay their eggs and carry on the next generation. So it's usually late spring or mild evenings, warmer than 5 degrees. And when it's damp, so when you get that horrible miserly rain, that's absolutely perfect for frogs and toads. They love it. So you see them all over the road. And in fact, where I live, I have to drive incredibly carefully on these nights. I have actually started my own toad patrol because it took me so long to get anywhere. So these volunteer patrols, they get the high-vis jackets, go out on these nights with a bucket. They pick up the toads and the frogs and they just help them cross the road. And that way we're trying to help as many of them survive as possible. Light pollution, crucially, is a key bringer of the insect apocalypse. So not many people like insects, but they're massively important. Once we lose our insects, our way of life on Earth is over. They pollinate, they do so much work for us. Without them, we have no food. So it is really important that we understand how crucial they are and how badly light pollution is impacting on them. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to move slide. So insects aren't very sexy, people don't really like them, but they are one of the key pillars of their ecosystems. They feed all the other species, so things like frogs and toads, hedgehogs, everything starts with the insects. Like I said, they pollinate our plants, but also when people don't want to think about insects, it's important to think of them as a food source for other species. For example, blue tits, they need to have winter moth caterpillars for their broods. That's the only thing they will eat. And each blue tit brood needs 15,000 of these moth caterpillars just for one brood to survive. So if we are having this impact on our insects by light, we are attracting them to an artificial light source, so they're not where they're supposed to be. Things like bats can't hunt them because they won't fly through light, or some of the species won't fly through light. They're not pollinating, so they're not doing the job that they need to do, but crucially, they're not finding mates. So we are wiping out whole colonies of insects in some cases overnight. Moths, again, people don't tend to like moths. Everyone loves butterflies, but people don't love moths. And there's actually 2,500 different species of moths compared to only 58 butterfly species, which is incredible. Most are night flying, but there are actually 100 day flying species like the cinnabar moth, the black and red ones that you see on ragwort quite regularly. You can see moths year round and you can find them absolutely everywhere. If you want to find moths, you can search flowering plants 1 or 2 hours after dusk or join a moth trapping session. You will be so surprised at the variety of moths you find. They've got some amazing names like the elephant hawk moth, which is the pink and green one at the bottom, the buff tip, which is the silver one on the right, that's designed to make itself look like a birch twig. And one of my favorite names is the death's head hawk moth, which was again a harbinger of doom because it's got a literal skull, or it looks like a human skull, on its body, and it was rumoured to be one of the things that set King George III off on one of his bouts of madness because he thought it was death coming to get him. But moths are excellent. Light pollution is responsible for the deaths of 100 billion insects each summer in Germany alone. That is huge, massive amounts. A recent study, I think it came out 2 weeks ago by Bug Life, showed that under street lights, there were 50% less caterpillars than there were in places where there were no street lights. So again, if we go back to the blue tits and their brood, that's half of their food source wiped out just from having street lights. I am aware of the time, so I'm going to quickly get through my other species. But Manx shearwaters, they are really important to Wales. We've got some of the biggest colonies in the world on the west coast of Wales. They only land on our islands, so places like Bardsey and essentially Ramsey, all of the ones on the west coast, because they can't be predated by things like foxes and rats, so they keep themselves on islands. But they're a really interesting species, and over their lifetime they can fly the equivalent miles of traveling to the moon and back 10 times, which is absolutely incredible. But the way they evolved over time, so that when their chicks hatch, the chicks have to immediately find their way to Argentina in South America. It is a 2-year journey and they won't touch land for that whole 2 years. So it's vital that they don't use any of their energy resources by getting lost. They need to find exactly where they've got to go. And they're one of the species that uses the natural glow of the horizon to find and orientate themselves. And what we are doing with light pollution is creating artificial horizontal glows over places like Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool. And we're finding reports of Manx shearwater that have flown into skyscrapers in these cities. People have been reporting finding penguins at the bottom of skyscrapers, but they're actually Manx shearwaters, and they're having to be shipped back to Wales and re-released, and hoping that the chicks can go and find their way. I'm going to run out of time, so I'm going to quickly.
Dani,
yeah,
you showing photographs there of the Manx shearwater has taken me back to my childhood, when one found its way over to Llandyfri, and we were all fascinated in school. Some of my classmates were saying it's a penguin, but Mrs. Price, our primary school teacher, she said Manx shearwater yw hwnna, and we looked after it for a while, and then I think somebody from Davis, who does a lot with, used to do a lot with nature and the RSPB up in Llanddwyn, took over control of the Manx shearwater and returned it to its rightful place. We are definitely running out of time here, but I will confess, Dani, that whilst I've been married to my wife for 25 years now, something you once said in a presentation like this one did cause our first ever argument in 25 years. It is the moth situation, where we do have we do have moths coming into our house, and I am now, as a result of you, Dani, far more protective of the moths that do come in. I think if my wife had her way, they would be splattered, and that has stopped happening.
Oh no!
That has stopped happening stopped happening in our house on the strength of a presentation you did like this a couple of months ago. So there's been a change of habit in our house.
I have one slide that I want to just finish on, so I will just go straight to that one, because I've totally, I think I thought about
18 seconds.
18 seconds, right, let's go. So the most important thing for people to understand is that light pollution, although it seems like it's all doom and gloom, it's actually good news, because it's something we know that we can do something about. So everyone who is watching this, you can go home tonight and you can have a positive impact. As a conservationist, we are very doom and gloom. It seems like the world is going to end and we never have any good news. But with light pollution, we know what we're doing. We just need people to do it. So when you go home, you can go outside, look at the lights that are outside your house and think, do you need this light? Is it lighting what you need it to do, or is it just on overnight for absolutely no reason? If you do need to have light on the outside of your house, please make sure it's shielded and direct it downwards so that we're not sending any light into the atmosphere. Use energy efficient bulbs lower than 50 watts and use warm lights. So this is a temperature scale of Kelvin. So the blue lights are very harmful to wildlife, but if we can get lights that are around the 2000 to 3000 Kelvin mark, they're the best ones to use, not only for wildlife, but our own health too. But most importantly, just be considerate with your light use. Think about how you're using it and only light what you need when you need it. And that's me done. Thank you very much. If you can please follow us on Project North, you can find out more. Diolch,
Dani. Hyfryd clywed y lais di. We've got an array of accents here today, and I think that just adds to the spice of this wonderful day which we've got here with the Argo Navis conference. It's great to see that people are protective of moths as well as frogs, and strangely enough, coincidentally, in our house there are nearly 2,000 penguins, because my wife does collect penguins of all kinds, all shapes and sizes. So we've actually got our own penguin colony now in Tregaron in the Cambria Mountains. So Dani, diolch yn fawr iawn I ti am dy amser, a hyfryd dy weld di, a hyfryd clywed hefyd.
David.
A gobeithio bod pobl wedi deall mwy a hefyd dysgu mwy am effaith golau a'r nos ar fywyd gwyllt yma yng Nghymru. A gobeithio welwn ni di gyd to. Thank you, Dani, for your time. Hope that everybody's learned a little bit more and understood a bit more about the effects of light pollution and the effects of light really on the wildlife of the night here in Wales.
Diolch, David. Diolch, pawb.
Look forward to seeing you in the next session at 3 o'clock. It's just about to start. So os ych chi'n ymuno dyn ni, ewch mewn i'r sesiwn nesaf yn y munud nesaf. Diolch yn fawr iawn I chi.